clustering, again, is not just for informational content. Now that visibility is becoming the real challenge, the real necessity, even more than traffic, because we know that traffic is shrinking from search engine, and let's not talk about LLMs. Visibility is important. To be visible, we must be visible along all the customer and search journey, and with the most effective mention and search snippet. Hi, I'm Gianluca Fiorelli, and this is SEO in 2026.
Gianluca, what's your number one SEO tip for 2026?
My number one SEO tips in the larger definition of SEO, so including AI search, is rethink the concept of clustering. Why? Because usually we think in clustering as something that is for creating content tab, especially in the informational space. On the contrary, we know that for visibility reason, we must be visible along all the search journey and customer journey. And this means we must be visible with our informational content, obviously, but also commercial, navigational, transactional, just to use the classic definition of intents. This means that when we are going to cluster, surely we must cluster for different types of cluster. The first one still is clustering for topics, so entity search and so on. But then it's also interesting and very effective to start clustering these. When we have done this first clustering, cluster these, let's say, queries and segments for other things, like what are our buyer persona? So let's cluster them for the buyer persona that are implied by these queries. Cluster them for sentiment. So in order to understand what kind of urgency and needs the person that are using this query are implying in their search. Another one could be, we know search is multimodal, so some kind of content is better served using video, like ours. Right now, others better served like with visuals content, like image, infographic, and so on, and others with written content. So if we know for this query what are the kind of search feature, for instance, that are more frequent, we can also cluster them for the kind of format that it would be better to use creating it. Obviously, the last one, but not the least, as I was saying, we should target all the customer journey. Customer journey is synonym of micro moments. I want to go, I want to buy, I want to know, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we should also cluster this initial cluster of queries and topics for the micro moments that they should target specifically. So this is something which is going more further to the classic clustering for a topic, and so becoming a topical authority is also going to serve other things and being more effective with our visibility. And in the sense that, for instance, if we are visible with a content which is responding to an urgency and is targeting a specific, a correct micro moment, and it presented with a format, the format that people tend to prefer for consuming that kind of information, then we are probably going to have a better success in terms of user signals that we know are extremely important for Google, surely, and consequently, because of how LLM use Google search for retrieving information when they search on the web, also for obtaining visibility on the LLM like ChatGPT, Perplexity, and so on.
So I'd like to understand a little bit more about the impact of other forms of clustering, because obviously I understand the benefit of clustering or keyword phrases for creating topics and becoming an expert within a series of topics. But you talked about clustering for micro moments. Can you talk about a little bit more about how that works and why that is beneficial for SEO?
Yeah, let me try it with an example. Let's say that someone is searching for information about how to paint a space marine for display and not for combat, not for the gaming. This is obviously, we should have content which is able to make Google understand that we are expert on the topic. So we have done our keyword research. Maybe we will even use the query for now to expand the query, the keyword research and so on. And we have done a cluster. But anyway, we know that all this question is not a search in isolation. Someone searching for how to paint a space marine for display probably is going also to look for information like, okay, what are the best airbrush that I can use for painting acrylic or oil? If acrylic, what brand, etc., etc., etc. There is a very big spectrum of topics that are related to this simple first query, which can be the start of a more complex journey. And all these queries surely are not just in the information. Many queries are, this person start with I want to know, with a theoretical information, then this I want to know is becoming I want to do. But if I want to do, I need something. So I want to buy, I want to go to a place where I can buy something. But if I want to buy something, maybe before I need more information specific to this line of product, for instance, acrylic paints that I want to buy. And then finally, the micro moment, the poor transactional I want to buy moment. So with considering the micro moments when we are making this clustering of all the query space around our topic, we are able to create content and infrastructure of content that is targeting correctly all the different search intent and micro moments. And this way, making us more visible in more queries all along the potential search journey inside Google or jumping from Google to ChatGPT and back and forward. This is the advantage.
I guess one challenge moving forward is the fact that search experience is becoming much more hyper-personalized, as you put it, which means that, of course, everyone has a different query almost, and getting data back from LLMs is more difficult than getting data back from more conventional search engines. So how do we target for queries that perhaps weren't searched before that we don't know are being searched?
Yes, obviously, it would be kind of Sisyphus Titanic challenge to use, I don't know, investigating with thousands of prompts. It would be also very expensive if we consider how much these tools usually cost. That's why I was saying that a good idea would be also to cluster it per buyer persona in this sense. Why? Because considering buyer persona, we can consider, for instance, this is something that you can do using a tool like ChatGPT, OpenAI, Claude, something like this. You upload in your project the buyer persona that have been defined by you or by the client, better by the client. And so you can say, okay, considering this content, this cluster that we already created, then indicating and knowing what are the buyer persona, indicate me what are the queries that better touch one or the other buyer persona. Doing so, we can have, for instance, the opportunity to create a specific content for someone who is an expert, and maybe the same topic, but for someone who is a newbie, a beginner. I'm still using the example of miniature painting. And this can make us being able to create an architecture of content that is able to have possibility and opportunity to be visible to bigger audience of people. So now we are not creating one content which is just targeting a universal kind of persona. But we are eventually creating content which is targeting specific persona, and then in order to be visible also in a condition of very personalized search. Then how we create this content is another story. It can be different types, different separate content, or can be, even if I don't like that much the word, can be chunks inside the content, which are one speaking to a certain kind of persona and other speaking to a different kind of persona. For instance, let's say that we have a landing page about safari in Kenya, but we are targeting different types of persona. We are targeting young couple without kids, mature couple without kids, families with kids or teens, and old senior couple. So we can have only one landing page. We don't need to create 4 different landing pages, but inside we can create modules that are specifically talking and selling up these tours with Safari in Kenya to each one of a specific target.
So I love your concept of clustering for buyer personas there as well. And obviously you talked about chunking of content on pages then as well. But does that not dilute potentially the impact of content on the page if one buyer persona happens to read the wrong piece of content first of all and perhaps gets switched off by the content and goes back and finds it irrelevant to their needs?
That is, I cannot deny that probably there is a risk that here is where the correct creation of the content is coming out. You have to brief the person who is going to create the content in order to, you have to create the content targeting this specific person. So it's something that you have to, in the content, you have to call out the characteristic of a persona so that when someone is searching, especially in LLMs, and is detailing its personal situation, because it's so that conversational search works, then LLMs, because of patterns and so on, will retrieve the correct content, not the incorrect one. In terms of classic search, then there is also a strong personalization also there, and it's going to be even stronger. So it's going to be not a problem, especially if the content are different kind of content, because you can specify in the H1, H2, H3 classic on-page SEO using wording that is clearly calling out a specific type of person.
So it's a bit of a challenge, isn't it? Because I can understand the need to chunk content and give AI the opportunity to take different sections of your content to serve the right perceived intent, but obviously it doesn't necessarily offer the optimum user experience for someone visiting your webpage. So is it possible in your mind to actually create content just for LLMs with no users in mind?
No, I mean, I think that is less difficult when it can be thought, in the sense that you have a landing page which is presenting the characteristic, and then what I was saying, for instance, in the case of a landing page about Safari, when you are creating just 4 classic boxes with one saying what are the things that us as a tour operator, for instance, can offer to young people, young couples without. So more adventure, more specific kind of experiences, instead in the blog where we are talking directly to the family with teenagers or kids, we were going to talk about, you are in a safari, but you are also in a glamping, which is going to offer you all kind of solution for your kids. You are not going to be abandoned, and you are not going to have security issue. Also, all the work that you have done before is indicating you that, for instance, for when we have family with kids or more mature couples desiring to do a safari, for instance, is their worries are mostly related to security, health, vaccine, all this kind of information. Instead of a young couple without kids, is not really thinking about this. It's really thinking more about contact with nature, living the adventure in terms of security. So all this information, when you have retrieved when you did your topic and research, and then you have clustered for value persona because of this.
Gianluca, what's the key takeaway from the tip you shared today?
My key takeaway is that clustering, again, is not just for informational content. Now that visibility is becoming the real challenge, the real necessity, even more than traffic, because we know that traffic is shrinking from search engine, and let's not talk about LLMs. Visibility is important. To be visible, we must be visible along all the customer and search journey, and with the most effective mention and search snippet.
Gianluca Fiorelli is an international and strategic SEO consultant. I find him over at iloveseo.net. Gianluca, thanks so much for being part of SEO in 2026.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be your host, your guest.
I've been your host, David Bain. Get your copy of SEO in 2026, the book, over at seoin2026.com.